Well, this week I got sick, which is a joy, and I took a COVID test. It came back negative, so now there's no solution. I don't know what to do after that anymore. So here I am. I try to remember what it was like before when there were other sicknesses. I was trying to tell Charisse, my wife, I don't know what this could be if it's not COVID. I don't even remember what the other illnesses are. So here we go. We'll try to get through this together. My voice usually gets better the more I talk, so hopefully by the end I won't sound like this. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you a story of something that's going on in Crossroads that I'm excited about. We have a couple of ladies who are heading out on a short-term trip to Bangladesh to help serve the folks there. Kay, part of our church, met a district superintendent from Bangladesh last summer, and they were talking about how hard it could be to gather as the church during the cold seasons because it can get surprisingly cold there, and their houses don't always have central heat, and so if they had blankets, they might be able to gather more. And so our group of ladies in Crossroads Moms gathered up a bunch of blankets and are sending that and Bibles and some other things with two ladies from our church over to Bangladesh this coming week. And so one of them is Alicia. Alicia, you want to stand and wave to everyone? Alicia's going, and then Mimi, I think, is with the kids. Or is Mimi here? Mimi's here. Mimi's also going. And just the way that God can provide, Mimi grew up in India right outside of Bangladesh and speaks the language of the folks in Bangladesh. And so we have people already prepared to help translate and to work with people who live there. And so it's just really exciting to see God opening doors to partner around the entire world. And so they're leaving this week, Wednesday, right? Is that right? Wednesday? And so pray for them as they're flying halfway across the world, and pray for their trip that it would bring about kingdom results and kingdom delight, and would help the church flourish in Bangladesh as well. So exciting to be a part of something global like that. Now, today, I'm going to be talking about a story that I think is pretty famous. It's a story of the Samaritan woman at the well. Before we get started, I would love to see a raise of hand. How many of you know this story? All right, great. So I'm going to waste all of our time reading 30 or so verses. Not really. I think it's great to read stories that we're familiar with. Almost all of us know this story, which is great. How many of us, this is another raise your hand, this is audience participation portion of the day. How many of us think that we really understand this story? Oh, well, come on. I'm going to ask the question again. How many of us think we understand this story? Okay, that's better. That's better. I don't think I'm going to drop some kind of radical revelation on you, but I do hope that we can consider this a little bit and just make sure we see it from all angles together. Is that a deal? Okay. And so the story is found in John chapter 4. This is, again, chapter 4 means it's pretty early on in Jesus' ministry. And Jesus is encountering a woman that would most typically not be talked to, stopped by, encountered by a Jewish man. And so there's all sorts of things that are surprising about this text. And sometimes we can become masters of the text in such a way that we're not allowed or don't allow ourselves to be surprised anymore. But let's open ourselves up to the possibility of surprise just a little bit, because the first readers of this text would have been shocked by this text. And so let's allow ourselves to experience this as a first reader and be shocked by who Jesus is and what Jesus does. John chapter 4, verse 1. Would you stand with me as we honor the reading of the word of the Lord today? Now, Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now, he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, And Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him if he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't grow thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." Just then the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asks, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. We're told that Jesus is passing through Samaria because he had to. It was on the way. And Samaria was a passive, light enemy of the Jews. There wasn't a violence between them, but there was an anger, a resentment between the two. And you'll see here, Nazareth is to the north on this map. That's Jesus' hometown in Galilee, where much of Jesus' ministry takes place. And the south part of this map is Jerusalem, which is in Judea, which is where, of course, Jesus will ultimately be crucified and buried. These are two of the major places in Jesus' story. And you'll see there's this plot of land in between called Samaria. And so the fastest way to get from Judea to Galilee or from Galilee to Judea is to pass through Samaria. And to do so was annoying and difficult. And most Jews, if they were going to make the trip, would just sort of pinch their nose and keep their head down and move through as fast as they possibly could. These two people, the Samaritans and the Jews, had a battle that had gone back 700 or so years. Essentially, the Samaritans started marrying people outside of the Jewish faith. And so the Jews saw them as mixed breeds, half Jews, that sort of thing. And about 200 years before Jesus' time, the Samaritans got tired of being looked down upon, and so they had concocted their own narrative that where God should be worshiped was actually not in Jerusalem, but was on a mountain in their land. That's convenient. They weren't allowed or supposed to go to Jerusalem, and yet they wanted to worship Yahweh, the one true God. And so they started researching what had happened in their land that was important. And they decided that most likely the mountain inside of their land, the tallest mountain, is where Joshua gave his final address to the people before he died. It might have even been where Noah's ark crashed and let people out after the flood subsided. They had this whole story about how this was the true mountain where God's presence was, not that piddly little mountain down in Jerusalem. And so a battle erupted that wasn't just about marriage anymore, but about where true worship was. The Samaritan woman says, it's on our mountain that we worship, but you guys worship in the temple down in Jerusalem. These sort of things, who truly owns God's presence, really can become a place where people argue and fight and get really mad at each other. And this had built an incredible wedge, a wedge that was already there, but had only grown worse across 200 years. Now, generally speaking, in the honor-shame game of the time, the Jews had more honor than the Samaritans. And so the Jews would lift their nose to the Samaritans, and the Samaritans would be angry at the way in which the Jews acted as if they were better than them. And so when we get to this story of Jesus crossing into Samaria and stopping, our ears should already perk up. Most Jews, especially rabbis, especially honorable, important people like someone like Jesus, would just lift their nose, turn their eyes, and power through Samaria, not looking or talking to anyone. But Jesus stops, and he meets a woman, and he begins to speak with her. And there's so much about the social hierarchy that's undone here. First of all, a man does not typically approach a woman in this time. A Jew does not typically approach a Samaritan. And a rabbi certainly doesn't stop to speak with a citizen who would bring them dishonor. Every interaction in this time is about bringing honor to yourself, and someone who has honor does not dishonor themselves intentionally by bringing honor to someone who has less honor than them. And in each of these situations, Jesus is the one who holds more honor. His gender, his nationality, his position in the religious hierarchy, he is the honorable one in each and every way. And stopping and having a conversation with this lady is more likely to bring him dishonor than it is to bring her honor. Now, here's where I want to stop and ask a couple more questions. I asked you if you knew this story before. How many of you think you have a pretty good grasp on what this woman's story is? Okay, all right, good. About a quarter of you. I wonder how many of the other 3/4 of you are lying or just kind of withholding whether or not, like, I don't want to be caught. Here's what different ways I've heard this woman talked about across the years. One is she's kind of like Elizabeth Taylor before Elizabeth Taylor, right? Kind of men are disposable. She gets married, she kicks him out, goes finds a better one, etc. How many of you heard this woman talked about in that way? Okay, yeah. I've heard her talked about in this way. The other one is that she's more like, she just flies. I mean, it's kind of similar, but like she doesn't like think she's going to stay married. She just kind of uses men and moves through them, right? It's not like she's bad at marriage. She just loves men. That's a little different, but how many of you heard that? Kind of, yeah, okay. How many of you have heard that, just maybe marriage is different back then, and so maybe there's something kind of like we don't understand about how marriage works in the ancient world? Anyone? Oh, that's good. None of you. I've heard that one before. How many of you heard that she's just mistreated by an unjust system? Okay, a few of you. Yeah, all right. How many of you heard that her husbands keep dying, so she gets passed from brother to brother to brother? Okay, all right. It's great. See, look at this. Now, a quarter of you said, I've got this thing mastered. And I gave up 5 examples, and we've heard of 4 of them. This is what I want to tell you. This is what I think and believe in my deepest core. You ready for this? I have no idea what her story is. Absolutely no clue. And the thing about it is I think any of these things are possible. But what I really want to get at, after we talk about why these things are possible, is that Jesus seems completely unbothered by what the reason is. Like, we are far more concerned about the salaciousness of her past than Jesus seems to be. That's really peculiar to me. Because I think, like, if I knew that she had been through 5 marriages, I'd probably want to get a little bit more out about that. Jesus knows what it is. He just throws it out like it's a fact. Yeah, you've been married to 5 dudes, and the dude you're with now is not your husband. Period. That's it. He doesn't go into that anymore. No shame, no questions, no explain yourself, no get yourself in order before you get this living water. It just states it as a matter of fact and then moves on. And I got to be honest, I'm a little scandalized by that piece. Like, the way I was often taught religion was get yourself together, get yourself right, be better. And Jesus is not that way here, and I don't know why, but he's not. He just says, this is your story. And it sounds like, regardless of whether or not she's morally upstanding or not, regardless, she's had a tough life. This isn't the way, the pinnacle of the good life. We know that. And it's not clear. It's not clear that she's morally questionable, but she might be. It's possible. But she's been through hardship and difficulties. A lot of you raised your hands saying that you had heard that it's possible that maybe her husbands had died. In Deuteronomy 25, 5-6, this is what it says. This is the reason why it could be. It says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Now, the first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother. Okay, there's logic to this. But how many of you ladies are thinking, I'd really like to just be passed on to my husband's brother if something tragic happened to him? It sounds terrible. And then, I don't even have a brother. It sounds like a rough system. It's an ancient system, no doubt about it, right? There's a reason for this. There's so much honor and passing on your family name. And then the other thing is, in this ancient world, if a husband dies, a woman can't just go down to the Walgreens or preschool or MBA and get a job and start paying the family's bills. And so in some ways, this system was set up in a patriarchal world to make sure that women were cared for and kept in the family if something tragic had happened. It's not a lovely system, I don't think, but it matched the world in which these words were written in. It protected and helped women, at least in some way, shape, or form, in the system they were in. Now, I say all that to say, it is possible that this woman married into a family deeply in love with a man, and whether because of war or disease or something, death just started riddling through the family. It's possible she was married 5 times to 5 brothers, and each of them died tragically, And now there were no more men left in the family that she had been married to, and was now moved to another house so that someone could take care of her. It's theoretically possible and well within the bounds of the law at the time that that's the case. It's also possible that she was a handful to live with, and men kept passing her from person to person to person to person. All of these things are on the table. However, what I think is incredibly clear is that this way of life that she's lived, whether tragedy is happening to her or she's creating tragedy, her life would have been considered deeply shameful. There's a sense in which she's probably at this well in the middle of the day when no other women are there. It's an empty well, just Jesus and her, and the whole town uses this well. She seems to be there in order to avoid other people. She seems to be going in the middle of the hottest part of the day when most likely most other women had been there early before the sun was at its hottest, getting their water to go back home and move on with their day. She seems to have been to come here in the middle of the day so as to avoid interacting with other people. That's my best guess of what's happening here. So she runs into a man at the well in the middle of the day, and he wants to talk theology of all things. I'm sure that's what she was hoping for when she got to the well. You could have living water if you just asked for it. And she probably thinks, I would do absolutely anything to not carry this heavy pot back and forth in the hottest part of the day every day. Tell me how to get this. And eventually Jesus keeps probing and probing and probing. As I believe and experience Jesus to do, Jesus probes and he probes and he probes. And so often that can feel difficult. So often that can feel more than I want, more than I ask for. And eventually Jesus gets to the root of the story with her. And what he uncovers is shameful. I'm sure she's embarrassed. She would go back to her town later and report it as, I met this teacher and he told me everything I ever did. She doesn't present as proud. So she's here in the middle of the day, avoiding people, running into a teacher that gets to the very, very bottom of her story. Can you feel her shame? This is not the way, you can have very, very lax definitions of marriage, and still 5 marriages is going to present as shameful in some context that you walk in life. Living with someone who's now your 6th man, you can hear the whispers from the town saying, well, is this one going to die too? Is she going to get kicked out again? She just can't hold on to a man, that one. The whispers probably felt like roars behind her back. And Jesus cuts to the very core of her shame and her story. And unlike you and I, seems completely unbothered by it for some reason. And he offers her, of all people, living water, and invites her into a relationship with God that begins to pull away all of the narratives and stories and religious battles that are happening in the time and place that they live in. And Jesus starts peeling things away that can feel like barriers in fights and battles. And he tells her the day is going to come that it doesn't matter if you're on this mountain or the temple, because the Spirit is going to break free for people like you. If there's anything that I've learned as a pastor in my lifetime, it's that salvation and forgiveness are the most compelling to those who feel as though they do not deserve it. People who feel like they're on top of the world, who've made every right decision, people who feel like they're winning in life aren't compelled by salvation and forgiveness. But it's people like this woman right here who feels distant from Jerusalem, who has a story and a past, who looked Jesus straight in the eye and sees love and conversation and is invited into a sort of worship she's never been invited to in before. She's compelled. So compelled, in fact, that she leaves and slips away and goes back to her hometown and tells everyone that she knows. Now, if my read is correct and this woman has a shameful past, you would think she'd be ashamed to go and tell about Jesus that she'd come to. You would think she'd be ashamed to go back and say, hey, you guys know all those things that you've been whispering about me? I just met a teacher who knew that. He told me everything I've ever done. That seems like a shameful thing to do, to go and double down on the shame and say, guess what? My shame is so public that a teacher from Galilee knows about it. But she's compelled by it. She's overwhelmed by her encounter with Jesus, and she has to go and tell. And when she goes and tells, she brings them all back to Jesus. And Jesus ends up spending days in Samaria and sees many, many people who are on the fringes and the outside of the Jewish religion come to see that Jesus is the Messiah, and people begin to become baptized into faith in Jesus Christ. It's an incredible story of a woman with a past that's littered with shame, coming face to face with Jesus, being told what her shame is, and finding that it is not a barrier for Jesus to do his incredible work of forgiveness with her. I don't know what kind of past or story or shame you feel in your own life, but it seems worth trying on the shoes of this woman, because her story is about as shameful as it gets in this time and place. And Jesus seems unbothered, undeterred. Jesus seems willing to offer her forgiveness, restoration, hope, living water, worship, a new start, baptism. She is welcome into the work that Jesus is doing. And her past, her story, whatever misstep there was that got her from that point to this point, is no barrier for what Jesus is doing. He sees her shame and her story and still invites her in this text to receive living water, to receive eternal life, and to worship God as if she is an insider. There's no bit of her past that is too much. And so I wonder, what is it that Jesus would uncover in your story? If Jesus pulled up a seat next to you right now and started getting to the very core of who you are and where you've been and what you've done, what is the most shameful thing you've done? What is the worst thing you have ever done? What is the thing you are trying to hide from everyone around you so that they will never know, because you're sure that if it got out, everything would change and everyone would see you as worse than they currently do? What is that thing? Jesus gets to the bottom of that. You cannot hide it from Jesus. However, Jesus isn't going to turn his back on you because of it. Our assumption is that when our secrets, our truth emerge, that people are going to turn their back on us. But Jesus leans in. He hears the confession, and the offer remains. She still offered living water, eternal life, and worship with God, even though her past is stained. It makes me wonder if the offer that Jesus gives her is because of her shame, not in spite of her shame. Jesus seems to see people with troubled stories and troubled pasts, and he sees the possibilities in people that the world often gives up on, and he leans in when the world leans away, and he gives offers of eternal life, living water, to people who are filled with shame. And the reason I say this is because in the very, very last chapter before what we read today is some of the most famous verses in all of the Bible. John 3:16 and 17. Jesus is talking to Nicodemus at this point, the exact opposite of the woman at the well. He's at the top of the hierarchy. He's an insider. He's powerful. He knows God. He goes to the temple. People see him walking down the street and say, what an honorable and wonderful man. And Jesus offers exactly the same sort of invitation to him. But he gives us a clue as well that Jesus gives us a clue that he's come into this world, not for people who have it put together, but for people who have a history of brokenness and shame in their life. And this is what Jesus says. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And this is the key part that I think if we can connect this to the woman at the well, really opens us up to see that what God has come for. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus knows that we have condemnable pasts. Jesus knows that we've sinned. Jesus knows that we have shame. Jesus doesn't come into this world naive. He comes to save us in spite of what he knows. So whatever story you're holding on to, whatever shame you have, whatever brokenness or hurt, whatever way you've been wronged, whatever pain you have, Jesus has come knowing full well that that's the case. He doesn't shy away from it, but he offers salvation because of it. And so we're going to sing a final song today. And I always think it's a good idea to respond to a sermon and to not let it go, not to wonder about it and hope I think about it on Wednesday or Thursday. But I also know that sometimes there could be shame piled upon shame to respond to a sermon. And I don't want that to be the case. I don't think anyone else thinks that that's the case. And so I wonder if you're holding on to some shame, if you could just trust that the church is rooting for you. No one's going to come and ask what you're praying about or anything like that. We're just going to pray with you that you find the grace that Jesus offers to the woman at the well. And then on top of that, I also think maybe there will be some who are praying for someone that they know that is just wrecked by guilt or shame or something that's happened to them that they can't get over. Maybe there's someone you're praying for that they could find this grace, that Jesus would encounter them the way that Jesus encounters the woman at the well. I invite you to come and pray for them as well. Not all prayer has to be for you. But we're going to sing a final song that's an invitation to the altar. And I invite you to come and to seek Jesus and to see if he might show up in your life to offer the sort of restoration and forgiveness and living water that he offered in this scriptural story. Would you stand with me as we sing this final song?